So today, we're diving into a really profound and honestly unsettling piece of writing called the Dissolution Manuscript. Think of it as a map, but not for a place you'd ever want to visit. It's a map of the experience of the self, your very sense of you, coming apart.
But before we go any further, let me ask you something. How solid does your sense of self actually feel? You know, that I that wakes up, that has opinions, that remembers its past. Most of us just assume it's there, solid as the ground we walk on. Well, this manuscript is all about what happens when that ground just gives way.
This quote from the beginning of the book really gets to the heart of it. This isn't some self-help guide for a spiritual journey you sign up for. No, it's more like a lifeline, a map sketched by someone who was completely lost for anyone else who suddenly finds themselves in that same confusing, terrifying place with no idea what's going on.
Okay, so if we're going to understand this map, we have to be super clear about what it actually is. The author isn't trying to give you a medical diagnosis or some nice, tidy spiritual story. This is something much more raw and, frankly, much rarer. It's a report from the inside, a direct description of what it actually feels like for consciousness to come undone.
So yeah, let's be really specific about what this manuscript isn't. It is definitely not a how-to guide. It also steers clear of clinical labels, because those are descriptions from the outside looking in. And it's not one of those neat, I had a problem, then I found the solution success stories. The author really honors the messy, confusing reality of the experience.
So, where does a journey like this even begin? Well, it starts with what the author calls the before. You know, that time of just ordinary, everyday certainty. A time when the self was just there. It was like the background furniture of your mind, something you never even thought to look at because it was just a given.
And you see this incredible contrast here. On one side, you've got that reliable, taken-for-granted self. And what triggered its collapse? It wasn't some huge, dramatic event. It was just an ordinary moment, sitting at a desk, thinking about a philosophical problem about consciousness. And in that moment, something just snapped. A thought was pushed a little too far, and the observer started observing itself, over and over and over again.
The author uses this incredibly powerful analogy to describe that first horrifying moment. Imagine two mirrors facing each other, creating that endless tunnel of reflections. Now imagine you aren't just looking at it. You are the reflection, and you're being pulled down that infinite tunnel, swallowed by the very act of looking.
After that initial shock, the author started trying to build a framework to even understand what was happening. This wasn't just random chaos. It felt like a structural failure. The very components that hold our sense of self together were beginning to loosen, to come apart at the seams. So the author breaks down our normal sense of self into these four parts. You've got the narrative self, that's your life story, right? Then there's the embodied self, that physical feeling of being right here. The relational self is who you are to your friends, your family, and then there's the witnessing function. That's just the bare awareness that's watching it all happen. Usually these four are woven together so seamlessly we don't even notice them.
So what happens when they come apart? In our ordinary integrated self, that I just feels like one whole thing. But in dissolution, that falls apart. Your life story starts to feel like a movie about someone else. Your own body can feel like a machine, a puppet. And that witnessing awareness, it's still there, but it feels like it doesn't belong to anyone. Okay, so now we move from the theory to the raw, lived experience. The manuscript shifts here from explaining the structure to describing the actual texture of this fragmentation. It's a deep dive into what this truly feels like moment by moment. This is the feeling of depersonalization. It's like you become a spectator in your own life. You're no longer the one doing things, you're just watching yourself do them. Watching yourself speak. The actual agent, the doer, just feels gone.
The author uses this perfect cinematic metaphor. It literally feels like the first-person camera of your life has just pulled back. You're not seeing through your own eyes anymore. You're watching the movie of your life from a strange, distant perspective.
And then there's this problem with language itself. The most basic word we have, I, suddenly becomes completely bizarre. You hear yourself say it, and it just hangs in the air. It's no longer just a simple word for you. It becomes a question. Who or what is this I that's talking?
This part is called derealization. It's not that you're hallucinating. The world looks the same, but it feels fake. Familiar places, even the faces of people you love, lose their warmth, their reality. It's like walking through a perfectly detailed but completely empty movie set. So how do you navigate this kind of terror? The author found this key insight from Buddhist teachings called the 2 arrows. The first arrow is the pain itself, the fear, the confusion. That part you can't avoid. But the second arrow? That's the suffering we add by fighting it, by telling ourselves this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening. And that second arrow, the author realized, that one is optional.
So what actually helps when you're in this territory? This really boils down the practical wisdom of the manuscript. Trying to think your way out of it, to fix it, just made everything worse. What helped were simple things, grounding in the body through walking, the regularity of a simple schedule, and just being in the quiet presence of other people. Things that didn't require a solid I to do.
So, what's on the other side of all this? This is not a story about getting the old self back. The journey doesn't end with recovery. It ends with a complete and total transformation.
And this is maybe the single most important takeaway. There's no going back to normal. The person who comes out of this is fundamentally different from the one who went in. You've seen that the floor is an illusion, and you can't just unsee that.
The change is just massive. The before self was solid, rigid, totally identified with its story. The aftermath self is what the author calls an approximate self. It knows its story is a construction. It lives inside its identity much more lightly, with softer, more permeable boundaries. It's not a broken self, it's a more flexible one.
Which brings us to this final question, one that turns the whole thing back on us. The author's harrowing journey revealed something profound, that the solid self we all think we have is actually a kind of construction, a story we tell ourselves. So, if we accept that, even just a little, how does that change things? How might you live your life differently, knowing that the you at the center of it all is a self that can be held much, much more lightly?